Ahead this hour, President Trump heading to the border after issuing an emergency declaration for Washington, D.C. ahead of next week's inauguration. Here was the president today before boarding Marine One. President Trump have finally spoken. Are they still on the same page, politically speaking? And what does their relationship tell us about the future of the Republican Party? And Democrats twisting the words of the Constitution in their latest attempt to push a new impeachment article. Legal scholars are skeptical why Nancy Pelosi is maybe wasting America's time again. And is this only going to worsen the political division in America? Also today, foreign nations not known as bastions of free speech now piling on President Trump's Twitter ban and big tech's lockout of conservatives. But it's not stopping there. United Airlines passengers being booted off the airlines for singing the national anthem. Parler suing Amazon. PayPal blocking pro-Trump groups with no history of criminality. What's next for big tech? And after months of pushing unconstitutional lockdowns, which have gutted New York City and the state, Governor Cuomo pulls a 180. He now says New York can no longer wait for the vaccine. What changed? All this and more ahead this hour on John Bachman Now. Hello and welcome. Noon here on the East Coast, 9 a.m. on the West Coast. Thanks for joining us today on Tuesday, January 12th, 1 week from the inauguration. And at this time next week, President Trump will no longer be president, but he has declared an emergency for the District of Columbia through January 24th. This says Homeland Security is also increasing its measures leading up to Inauguration Day. Acting Homeland Security Secretary Chad Wolf is now moving up the timing of a special security event to Wednesday instead of January 19th, citing this week's violent attack on the U.S. Capitol, as well as an, quote, evolving security landscape. Wolf also resigning this week. The FBI has also issued a bulletin warning of plans for armed protesters in all 50 state capitals and in Washington, D.C. in the days leading up to the inauguration. The Washington Post, also reporting that several Capitol police officers today have been suspended, and more than a dozen are now under investigation for their role in last week's breach of the U.S. Capitol. There are allegations of incitement and collusion here as well, so the timeline is critically important. News organizations like the New York Times have done their own analysis of this timeline. Several other sources have confirmed this as well. At about 12:15, the rioters started walking towards the Capitol, and the president at this point was only 15 minutes into his speech. This is also when those pipe bombs were first reported at both the Republican National Committee headquarters and the DNC's HQ. Now, this all later around the security situation currently in Washington, D.C., and welcome in Newsmax national correspondent Logan Raddick. Great to see you, Logan.
Good to see you too, John. And we know that at least 25 domestic terrorism investigations are underway. And according to Ohio Democrat Congressman Tim Ryan, at least 2 Capitol police officers are under suspension facing allegations of misconduct while they were on the job in last Wednesday's unprecedented situation here on Capitol Hill. And the finger pointing continues on both sides of the aisle as to who bears the blame for the escalation last week.
President Trump is also granting D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser's request for an emergency declaration.
This is necessary because the inauguration poses several unprecedented challenges that exceed the scope of our traditional planning processes. The COVID-19 pandemic and, of course, the domestic terror attack on the United States Capitol.
Still, the mayor is expressing concern.
Scared of anything, it's for our democracy because we have very extreme factions in our country that are armed.
And the Pentagon is authorizing the deployment of up to 15,000 troops for Inauguration Day. That is another protective measure taking place on January 20th to ensure the peaceful transfer of power. John.
A show of force to ensure the peaceful transfer of power. Logan, we'll see you in the next hour. Thanks so much. All right, Vice President Mike Pence and President Trump yesterday meeting for the first time since last week's violence at the Capitol. According to a senior administration official, the men agreed to work together for the remainder of the term, suggesting there are no signs that President Trump is planning to resign before January 20th. What happens next after that, who knows? Pence also signaled he would deny any demands to immediately oust the president through the 25th Amendment. Let's welcome in now, or we'll have more with Newsmax White House correspondent Emma Robinson in just a moment. Let's welcome in Mark Halpern now, political analyst and host of the Mark Halpern Focus Group, to talk more about this. Great to see you, Mark.
Good afternoon, John.
All right, so President Trump is not resigning. Vice President Pence will not invoke the 25th Amendment. We know this wasn't going to be happening. The chances of impeachment, obviously, they can have this article of impeachment, but what it means for the presidency, we'll see. But has the hatchet been buried between Vice President Pence and President Trump?
Well, you know, President Trump is interesting. There are times when he is a big forgive and forget guy. I have seen him have major conflicts with folks who he then is happy to work with. And at other times, he holds a grudge. I think most of us are like that situationally. Mike Pence has been exceedingly loyal. They did not have a close relationship, to say the least, before 4 years ago when Pence was put on the ticket. And I think in the end, President Trump recognizes it's in his short-term interest to avoid Mike Pence thinking about the 25th Amendment for the two of them to get along. And I think longer term, Mike Pence has played a unique role in Donald Trump's life, not just his professional life. And so my guess is that both of them will agree to get along despite the clear friction that's existed over the last week.
It was obviously a marriage to bring together the establishment wing, which Pence represented, and the new Trump wing of the party here. And, you know, everybody's going to be looking at this relationship moving forward to see what it tells us about the future of the party.
No question. I mean, look, Mike Pence had a political identity before he became Donald Trump's running mate, but that was mostly for insiders. He was not particularly well known as a congressperson and then as governor of Indiana. His national aspirations existed before. They exist now. He'd like to be president of the United States. I think his chances are pretty minimal based on talking to Republicans at the grassroots level and around the country. He's seen as a loyal vice president, but not necessarily someone who could run for the top of the ticket. That, though, was the view of George H.W. Bush, who eventually, of course, became president, and Al Gore, who went on to be his party's nominee and win the popular vote. So I think people are underestimating Mike Pence, and I think he will always be part of the Trump political family, and that is worth something, particularly now when the party is really facing a kind of a crossroads about what its identity is like in the post-Trump era.
You know, you look at this objectively, it's hard to imagine, you know, a more difficult situation for Mike Pence to be in last week. And, you know, by all accounts, he passed the test, even though some people obviously not happy with him, you know, pushing that challenge as they wanted. Also, let's talk about the impeachment aspect of this. Now, Democrats are citing a very rarely used constitutional amendment. Legal experts are very skeptical. The American public probably skeptical, too. There's lots of polling out there. From what I've seen, it's not great. But YouGov, Marist, Ipsos all had polls showing that this is like a 50-50 issue. It seems like it could backfire on Pelosi and the Republicans who support it.
Well, it could. I mean, there's lots of sentiment out there. But right now, I think the most important thing to emphasize in terms of sentiment is Democrats in the House and to a large extent in the Senate, they're not thinking about public opinion polls. I'm not even sure they're thinking much about public opinion. They are red hot angry about what happened on Wednesday, about the invasion of the Capitol and the responsibility they put on the president. And so regardless of what happens, what the House Republicans do, what the president might say, I think they are bound and determined to impeach the president. And I think, unlike sometimes when politicians say, well, we don't care about the political consequences, and they don't really mean it, I think this time Democrats mean it. They're not really thinking about the political calculations. They're thinking about what they, fueled by anger and outrage, want to do.
Now, Joe Biden says he wants unity, and you think he could stop this impeachment of an incoming president? He could say, look, you know, Jared Kushner just met with my national security advisor, Jake Sullivan. The transition is happening now. The president said it would happen, so let's focus on the future and not the past. So why haven't we heard something like that from Biden yet?
Well, he sent a soft signal last week. He basically said the way Donald Trump should go out of office is on January 20th. But he's clearly not publicly objecting to the impeachment. And my understanding is that privately, the Biden team speaks regularly to the Democratic leaders on the Hill. They recognize that this is a locomotive speeding downhill at 700 miles per hour. It is not stoppable by Joe Biden. It's not stoppable by Nancy Pelosi, even if she wanted to stop it. So I think Joe Biden, one of his political strengths is he recognizes what the traffic will bear. He recognizes kind of the mood of Congress and can understand it and make decisions based off of that. And I just don't think he sees a way to stop this from happening, even though my understanding is that he and his advisors recognize that in all likelihood, the Senate will not vote to remove Donald Trump. And so what you'll have is effectively a symbolic vote in the House. Mm-hmm. Maybe some Republicans, maybe up to a dozen will vote for it, but that won't affect Donald Trump's capacity to carry on. And it also will, in all likelihood, inflame those 74, at least of those 74 million people who voted for Donald Trump.
And I think it tells us a lot about the balance of power in the Democratic Party. You mentioned this as a locomotive that Joe Biden can't stop. And, you know, he is the titular head of the Democratic Party now, unquestionably so. He's going to be the president of the United States. And we do see these signs from Nancy Pelosi where she's putting AOC on the House Oversight Committee and Joe Biden unwilling to stop this impeachment. They are scared of the new generation of progressives.
To some extent, but I think it's also, you can take the Delawarean out of the Senate, but you can't take the Senate out of the Delawarean. How's that? I believe I'm the first one ever to say that. Joe Biden is a legislator at heart. You know, he was in the legislative branch far longer than he was in the White House. And I think one of the things you learn, kind of muscle memory, if you're a member of Congress, is defer to the congressional prerogatives, can defer to the leaders. Now, he also doesn't want to get in the middle of a mess he doesn't have to. And so it's easy situationally for any president or presidential candidate or president-elect to say, I defer to Congress. But in this case, I think he's deferring to Congress because the alternative would be to object more strenuously and lose. Right. Joe Biden is not entering the White House as the strongest president of all time. He just isn't.
Yeah,
he's going to have to defer to Congress on a lot of stuff.
Yeah, that's a good point. Deferring to Congress, sometimes deferring to the public opinion here. I know these polls aren't the best, but maybe this would be a situation where they should listen to the American public in these polls, because I talked to a lot of people. They were promised those $2,000 checks. It doesn't seem like a priority for Nancy Pelosi and Democrats. Great to see you, Mark. We'll see you soon. And we look forward to hearing what your focus group has to say about impeachment as well. All right. Also today, Las Vegas casino mogul and GOP mega donor Sheldon Adelson has died from complications of treatment from non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Adelson donated more than $250 million to Republican candidates and super PACs. Since 2015, he was also a fierce supporter of Israel and was a close ally of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He was 87 years old. After months of pushing unconstitutional lockdowns, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo now says New York can no longer wait for the coronavirus vaccine to reopen. So what changed? We'll talk to Michael Reagan about that next.
Closed until the vaccine hits critical mass. The cost is too high. We will have nothing left to open. We must reopen the economy, but we must do it smartly and safely.
Wait, that's Governor Andrew Cuomo pulling a complete 180, backtracking now on reopening the Empire State, this while New York's COVID numbers continue to surge. In terms of reported cases, things are now worse than they were for New York back in March. Joining us now to talk about this, Newsmax contributor and president of the Reagan Legacy Foundation, Michael Reagan. You can check out Michael's latest column up on Newsmax.com. It's called Pelosi's Guilt by Association Logic, Authoritarian and Dangerous. And it is indeed. And Michael, let's talk about this first, though. You know, a lot of mixed emotions, I guess, when you hear Governor Cuomo finally say the same thing that so many people have told him. You can't close down New York. You're killing the entire state. What's it like for you to hear those words?
I wish our governor here would say the same words, because I just talked to my doctor yesterday who said this is at least going to last another 6 months for everybody to get close to getting the virus and getting herd immunity. We can't live another 6 months with everything closed down, these restaurants and everything else. And as you know, we've talked about before, that I can't go to a restaurant, sit outside and eat 6 feet away from another table, but I can go to LAX, get on a plane, take my own food, sit next to somebody 3 feet away, and eat and drink for 5 hours on the way to New York.
Yeah, and I think it also shows us, too, I mean, the timing of this is suspicious. You know, Cuomo was out walking his dog without a mask on a long time ago.
For everybody who's ever gotten COVID-19, it's interesting. Nobody from the media ever asked anybody, what about the COVID-19 in Europe? Who's to blame for that? And Donald Trump was right from the very beginning. Blame China. That's where this whole thing started when it got to the United States of America and around the world. But you have these leaders once again telling us to.
New York is being covered because, you know, Gavin Newsom now, we see on the screen here, he's obviously pro-lockdown, and this undercuts his argument if Governor Cuomo starts opening up New York. These are the two worst states, really. I think, you know, Arizona's bad, too, and there are other states as well. But these are two of the worst states in terms of death in the entire country. You got one opening up now, even though things are just as bad as they've always been, and you got California staying closed.
Well, again, is our governor here going to listen? There's a battle between our mayor here now in L.A. and the governor, because the mayor believes the governor is hoarding the vaccine.
Sounds familiar, just like New York, too, right?
LA. Yeah, and so this is, again, another one of the major issues going on out here in California, that everybody talks about the vaccine. They're going to open up Disneyland now for people to line up and get the vaccine. But is the vaccine going to be, in fact, available at that time? There are so many issues and so many problems. But I think if you don't start opening up the economy now, you're not going to have an economy to open 6 months from now or 9 months from now. It's just not going to be there to exist.
Yeah, back in May of 2020, David Marcus, an opinion writer for the New York Post, made basically the same argument that Governor Cuomo was making, that, there will be nothing left to open up if they continue to wait. And that's the fear that you have in California. That's the fear that a lot of New Yorkers have.
Absolutely right. I mean, you have people now who are, they're having their hairdressers come to their homes, their manicurists come to their homes, they're sneaking in back doors, they're doing everything they can.
Right.
So open up the economy and quit making people so fearful of the next door neighbor acting like they're in France during the 1930s and they're going to be turned into the Gestapo because they've dared cut somebody's hair or done somebody's toenails and fingernails.
I think it's more like prohibition. You have speakeasies, only it's in reverse, where people come to your house to do your hair and your nails. Because again, people don't really believe that the danger is real, because public health officials don't seem to believe it either. Michael, great to see you as always. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, coming up, President Trump and Vice President Pence are signaling he will not resign. The president will not resign, and they're mending fences. We'll discuss that and more coming up next. Welcome back. President Trump and Vice President Pence meeting at the Oval Office yesterday for the first time since the president's supporters breached the Capitol last Wednesday. According to a senior administration official, President Trump and Vice President Pence agreed to work together for the remainder of their term. And this, as the White House plans to vote today on a resolution calling on, or the House, I should say, not the White House, the House of Representatives, plans to vote on a resolution today calling on VP Pence to invoke the 25th Amendment, something he said he would not do. Let's find out more now about the Trump-Pence relationship and welcome in Newsmax White House correspondent Emerald Robinson, who joins us live now from Washington. And Emerald, President Trump on his way down to Texas. We expect him to speak down there on the border in just a few moments. But what did we learn yesterday about the future, perhaps, of a Pence-Trump relationship?
Well, look, how they're describing it to me is that it was a truce of sorts. That doesn't mean that this is the warmest relationship following how Vice President Mike Pence handled the certification of the Electoral College, which the president has very much criticized. But he is saying that, they're going to be able to work together. There's only a few days left in this administration, and they're both focused on the American people. The president also and his team saying that what happened last week was not a representation of the America First movement. Now, we did hear directly from the president today. This is the first time we've heard from him in the last few days, and the president condemning the violence while also condemning the impeachment effort. Take a listen. Oh, no sound. Okay, so we don't have that, but that's I'll tell you what he said. The president said this is just a continuation of the impeachment hoax, calling it the biggest witch hunt in American political history. The president also saying that they never want violence, that he has never wanted violence. Now, look, the House Democrats are pushing on with impeachment. They plan to vote on it tomorrow. It kind of contradicts the inauguration theme that President-elect Joe Biden has chosen, that being America Unified. Many saying that if the vice president or the president-elect really wants to unify America, then he should call on House Democrats to abandon this impeachment effort. John.
Yeah, we talked about that with Mark Halperin and why he might not be able to. He might not have the ability to stop, as Mark Halperin called it, a runaway locomotive towards impeachment. And it's going to probably end in a crash, too, just like runaway locomotives do. Emerald, thanks so much. We'll see you soon. All right, for more on this, let's welcome in Democratic strategist and former Obama campaign director Robin Byro. He's also a retired Army Ranger. Let's also welcome in now retired Marine Gunnery Sergeant Jessie Jane Duff. She's the co-chair of Veterans for Trump, the advisory board, and also sits on the board of Women for Trump. Robin, Jessie, great to see you both. How you doing?
Hey, good morning.
All right, so there are 8 days left until the inauguration. We hear Chad Wolf is resigning. We hear problems about communication between the Capitol Police and the Pentagon. We have reports that there are protests planned for 50 state capitals, the Washington, D.C. as well. And, it brings up questions about who's in charge here, who's running the show. Jessie, is there any concern from you about what may happen on Inauguration Day? It seems like there's a lot of attention being paid to an impeachment that's not really going to change anything, and a lot of less attention paid to what could happen on Inauguration Day.
Yes, I do feel that what Congress is trying to do, Nancy Pelosi's team, is only inciting more controversy and increasing the threshold of divisiveness. Over 77% of Americans in a recent poll came out. They want them to focus on the coronavirus efforts. They want to get businesses open. Over 65% of the American people feel that this is a waste of time and a waste of dollars. Only 23% want to see this move forward. And obviously, those are the people who would never be convinced otherwise to support the president. With this said, we know that this type of controversy is only inflaming the 75 to 80 million people that supported the president. The Democrats, at the end of the day, know that they still need those votes. And people like Joe Manchin have come out very stoically and said he's not going to support impeachment and he's not going to support having him removed. And I admire this senator for saying this because he's going to get hit hard by his own party. But this cannot go forward. We must move forward as a nation, and let's fight politically, but let's not become so saboteurish that we look like a dictatorship in this country.
Yeah, and, Robin, I think, there's a lot made about the difference of response to what the protests we saw last week versus the protests we saw over the summer. And, a lot of this was made about, look, there was a racial disparity that caused, maybe the show of force wasn't the same. But I think, it's more important to focus on who's not here. Mark Esper basically resigned as a result of the show of force to, prevent those protesters. President Trump got pushed into a safe room in the White House as well. The church was set on fire there. But we have an acting defense secretary now, the Secretary of Homeland Security resigning. He was enacting as well. Are you concerned about, who's running the show here when we have a very tense situation here?
John, I do have concerns, but of course, as we know that there are 16,000 National Guard troops that will be on the ground. There are 7,000 right now, as I'm told, in Washington, D.C., and that's great. So congratulations. I applaud all efforts to activate those. I just want to point out there were 42 different ground troop brigades that were there for the Black Lives Matter protests. So they have the ability to get organized for this. We're starting to see that now. I'm really grateful. I'm not sure if I haven't seen this verified, but I was told that Ivanka Trump was actually going to be there at the inauguration. I'm glad to see that, if that in fact is true.
Yeah, I guess there were conflicting reports about is Mike Pence going to be there, but I think he's going to be there, Ivanka Trump. We talked about this briefing that's happened between Jake Sullivan and Jared Kushner. The transition is happening, and you wonder how helpful the impeachment is going to be in the transition process. I don't think very helpful. Now, lawmakers are also calling for President Trump's removal. He's down at the border today. But I wanted to ask you, too, because we're learning about some of the folks that have been arrested and have actually admitted to being inside. And, of course, one of them we know was an Air Force veteran, the woman who was killed in Ashley Babbitt. Another suspect who was arrested, he was broke the law, entered the Capitol, according to their arrest reports, illegally.
It's very upsetting for me to see any of this type of chaos because all it ends up doing is staining the reputation.
We reported the New York Times is saying, they're looking at other, groups, domestic terrorist groups, and even foreign governments to see how they were able to radicalize people online, Robin. It's very concerning.
It's deeply concerning, and as my understanding, there's 25 that they've identified that are veterans, and it's deeply troubling, and just cuts right to my soul because we did sign that oath. It just I can't understand it for the life of me, and it definitely does set back not just the MAGA movement, but veterans. It sets back all of us. And look, I agree with Jessie Jane Duff. There's radical extremists all over the political spectrum, on the far left and the far right. We don't need any of that. Right. That does not represent who we are as Americans. And to see that they sieged the Capitol and did this is a stain on an American democracy. Yeah,
and that's why we're focused on the actual names of the people who have been arrested so far, the ones who admit being there as well. They are Trump supporters, and that's who the arrested. So either they're focusing just on these folks, or that's the people who were there in the mob, and we have to get to the bottom of it, regardless of who they are. Jesse, Robin, thank you so much. We appreciate your insight. We'll talk to you guys coming up in the next hour. Also coming up, New England Patriots head coach Bill Belichick declining to accept the Medal of Freedom from President Trump. Why he's doing that. We'll get more on that and much more on other stories. Your catch-up is next with Rachel Roller.
Welcome back. I'm Rachel Roller. It's time now for the catch-up. 5 stories to take you behind the headlines, plus some other stories that you may have missed. New York Republican Congressman Tom Reed announcing he will join other lawmakers on introducing a resolution to censure President Trump. Reed writes in the New York Times that he will work with Congress to stop Trump from running for federal office in the future. Now, the House will introduce a resolution today to censure Trump for the Capitol building protests last week. Meanwhile, both AT&T and Verizon halting contributions to elected officials who opposed the certification of President-elect Joe Biden's victory. Now, they're joining other companies such as American Express, Blue Cross Blue Shield, and Marriott in making similar moves. Many GOP congressmen opposed the electoral voters in several states, along with Senators Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley. Washington Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal is testing positive for coronavirus after sheltering in a crowded Capitol room during the protest. Jayapal's office says that she's quarantining and working remotely for the time being. Now, this comes after New Jersey Congresswoman Bonnie Watson-Coleman announced she tested positive. The head of Congress office of the attending physician warned lawmakers that they could have been exposed to the virus while sheltering together. President Trump awarding Ohio Congressman Jim Jordan the Presidential Medal of Freedom during a closed-door ceremony at the White House. Now, the White House says Jordan got the award for confronting senior Justice Department officials and helping to expose how the Russia probe began. This comes after California Congressman Devin Nunes also got the award. However, New England Patriots head coach Bill Belichick declining to accept the Medal of Freedom from the president. Now, Belichick says this decision was made in light of the Capitol building protests. He also says remaining true to people, team, and country outweigh any individual award. Well, the Alabama Crimson Tide are the 2021 college football national champions. Heisman Trophy winner Devontae Smith had 12 catches for more than 200 yards and 3 touchdowns, becoming the game's offensive MVP. And this is Coach Nick Saban's 6th championship and with Alabama alone and 7th overall. So he's not doing too bad. That's it for today's catch-up.
You don't have to tell me. You don't have to tell me. I'm a Georgia fan, Georgia grad. We face Alabama, and we lose far too often. It's kind of something I want to talk about.
You know how it feels then.
Yes, I know far too well how it feels. Great game last night, though, for Bama. Great to see you, Rachel. We'll see you in the next hour. All right, Governor Andrew Cuomo is now preparing to reopen New York's economy, so he says. The governor tweeting yesterday, quote, "We simply cannot stay closed until the vaccine hits critical mass. The cost is too high. We will have nothing left to reopen. We must reopen the economy, but we must do it smartly and safely." So now, is it a good time for New York to reopen its economy after pushing that back over 11 months? Let's welcome in now Dr. Bob Lahidi. He's chairman of medicine at St. Joseph University Hospital and a professor of medicine at New York Medical College. Dr. Lahidi, great to see you.
Good to see you, Jim.
So reopening New York, I mean, kind of a 180 from Governor Cuomo. You know, obviously, I don't want you to comment on the political aspects of this, but your medical assessment is important here. Is it safe to do this?
With limitations, certainly, John. It's important for him to open up the economy through having, like, for example, having teachers vaccinated as a priority. That has always been my feeling, to get people back to work. You can't go back to work if you're taking care of your children at home. So a lot of people are stuck, especially people who come from lower socioeconomic groups, which is a very, very volatile COVID-19 population. And secondly, I'd like to see people go back to work. And so in that regard, I would open things up. We can continue to dine outside in bubbles and in tents and all that sort of thing while we move forward. But I really think it's important to open things up, and was important about a month ago to do that.
Yeah, the mental health aspects of this important, too, and that's been talked about. Now, Joe Biden received his second COVID-19 vaccination.
Whether we're going to get a new injection every year or another 2 injections every year. And that's going to be something that's very interesting going forward.
Yeah, that's a great point. And, you know, that's probably what these drug manufacturers would like, is if you have to get the vaccine every year, a little different than, the vaccine. I guess, but that's the case, right? As children, children can now get vaccinated against chickenpox, but as adults, you have to get another vaccine from the shingles virus, correct?
That's correct. That's right. And we also get a different flu vaccine every year, which is tweaked a little bit to accommodate
like the shots you get in your arm. I'm just kidding, Dr. Lee. I'm still waiting for that. One day, maybe we can get all vaccinated. I think you have your vaccine. I'll get mine eventually. We can have those shots, the good shots.
That's
at the bar.
Right.
Great to see you, Dr. Lahidi. We'll see you in the next hour. All right, coming up, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo slamming big tech for their attack on free speech. But Pompeo, not the only one out there. World leaders have now spoken out. They're concerned about the encroachment on free speech here in our country, the country with the First Amendment.